Hi guys, so now that we have all the male voice types out of the way, it's time to look at the ladies. Now you guys have three voice types available to you, and this one is the contralto. So a contralto is the lowest possible female voice type. It's also by far the rarest voice type. There really aren't that many contraltos in the music industry, particularly ones that I can use as examples. Now there are some, so I'll be okay, but there really aren't that many because most women have much higher voices than these guys. They're actually quite a unique commodity. So how do I identify an alto voice? Firstly, I want to dispel a little bit of a rumour. Some people think that an alto voice is similar in tone to a man's voice because it's so low. This isn't necessarily the case. Most of the time an alto does have a lower sitting range than most women, but they are above a tenor. It is a female voice type, and female voices pretty much 95% of the time are higher than a male's voice. It's just a biological fact. Now, it is worth saying that some altos are really proficient in their lower register. Not like mega low, not like bass or baritone low, but they can get down to good third octave notes. This is the woman's voice type that is by far the most comfortable in the third octave and will have the most projection. Still not a huge amount, they're still more comfortable in the fourth octave like most women would be, but they do have a more kind of usable third octave range than most women. So an alto's voice is kind of mainly known for its smoky, dark, heavier tone in the middle of their range. They sing most of the time in the middle of their range, kind of in the mid to high fourth octave. That's where they do most of their work. But unlike most women, they have a deeper tone, a richer tone, and a thicker tone, and obviously a smokier timbre. Now, it's also worth mentioning another way to identify a contralto voice is in comparison to a mezzo-soprano or a soprano, who would sing things like a B flat 4 or a B4 easily. That would be either a really easy, comfortable note, or it would sound really like a low belt. It wouldn't be that hard at all. Whereas for an alto, this is their upper belt. For example of this, let's have a look at Cher singing the national anthem and the really big ending note. Okay, so as you can see there, you think that's really high. That sounds enormous. That sounds really high in her voice. It sounds huge, right? It's only a B flat 4. That's barely sitting above a tenor's comfortable belt notes or really high belt notes because their voice has got so much weight to it, they have to bring it up so far that their big belts are nowhere near as high as most women's. They have much bigger belts around the B4, C5, that sort of area, whereas mezzo-sopranos and sopranos obviously belt a lot higher than that because of the vocal weight they've got to bring up. It's really interesting, actually. It's an easy way to identify an alto, just by hearing something where it sounds a lot higher than it is because in their voice it's super high, but for a regular woman it's quite low. As I say, a B flat 4 for most women is nothing, it's child's play, it's easy, it's where the voice would naturally do some decent work, whereas for an alto, it's an upper belt. It's like towards the top of their chest range. So it's just an interesting to note. It's not a negative by any means, it's just a vocal characteristic that can really help you identify the alto voice. Now, what is the average range for a contralto voice? Most sources put it between an F3 and an F5, and while I absolutely agree with the lower end, an F3 is a really good generic low note for a contralto voice, I haven't really heard that many altos that can belt comfortably in a modal voice or a mixed voice, really above a D5. So I'm going to kind of put it between the F3 and the D5. Some people can go lower. It will sound kind of not that projected and not that great. They won't necessarily be the most usable voice they've got, but they could actually hit lower notes. But an F3 would be where their voice would like still shine, still have some resonance to it. A lot could probably go quite a bit higher, but it would most likely be really huge and really belty and too loud or really head dominant. So I think an F3 to a D5 is a really good place to put the generic alto voice and the modal voice. Most altos would probably sing the majority of their stuff in the fourth octave. That's where their vocal weight, vocal colour, and resonance would really sit well in the mid to upper fourth octave. That's where most of them do most of their work. So it's fair to say the tessitura of an alto is higher than a tenor's, but it's lower than most other women. So that's the way you should look at it. It's above all male voices, but it's not that much above a tenor, and it's not that much below a mezzo-soprano, but it is somewhere in the middle. It's a lower female voice, it's not a low voice, if that makes sense. It's low for a woman, but a man can obviously go significantly lower, even at their higher voice types. It's just the way biology works. But as I say, there are some altos that can go really low, and some sound almost androgynous, but they're few and far between. They're generically just kind of a bit lower than most women and a bit higher than most tenors. An alto's biggest strength, honestly, is their uniqueness. So altos are rare, super rare. You will not have heard them much before. Due to the current landscape of pop music where high notes really sell, you won't hear altos all that much on the radio. Maybe a little bit more than basses and baritones, possibly. Like Jess Glynn's probably just about an alto, possibly. But you won't hear too many of them. It's actually a really unique listening experience because you will not have heard this sound or this style or this vocal colour all that much at all. Okay, so in terms of actually vocally, an alto's biggest strength is in their mid chest range. They have by far the most comfortable, easy time singing between kind of an F and a G4 and that sort of area. That's where the vocal colour still sits really well because obviously as a woman they can sing higher, but they have an easier time not pushing up to these really mega high notes. Their voices sound smoky, dark, and rich and healthy and really strong and really good in these middle fourth octave notes because that's just where their voice sits. It's where they can bring a sound up to where it won't hurt, it won't cause damage, it'll just sound absolutely unbelievable. An alto's upper belt can also sound really good and really powerful due to the weight of their voices. Obviously, when they belt these really high notes and keep all this weight up top, it can sound enormous. Obviously, note that this is well below most other women who can belt a lot higher, but an alto's voice does sound really good in these areas. Around the B4, it can sound super strong, which obviously if a soprano were to sing a B4, it wouldn't be that strong, but obviously they have areas of their voice which work a lot better. But an alto's upper belt is also pretty nice. An alto's low notes are also pretty good. They're not like amazing, but they're decent. They have a reasonably good time below middle C. They're the voice type of the women that have by far the easiest time down here. Most women couldn't really project at all below middle C. They'd have some whispery low notes and they could scoop down a little bit, but they wouldn't use them all that much. Whereas an alto can kind of dabble in this area and have pretty good results. Obviously, they're not going to be as low as a baritone or a tenor because obviously it's a female voice and the female voice just doesn't have low capabilities all that often. You can train it to, of course you can, but generally a woman's voice sits in a higher middle place, not a really low place. So an alto has decent lows for a female voice. They're not like unbelievably low or anything, but they're decent. So yeah, just to summarise, main vocal strength, mid to upper chest voice, decent upper belt, okay low notes. Okay, so the main place in alto's voice is kind of weaker is in the fifth octave. Most can get into it, but they lack the flexibility and freedom of most female voices. Generally, they'll either approach the notes way too heavy and way too loud with their thicker, darker voices, and it'll sound way too strained, way too shouty, and way too uncomfortable. Or they'll need to kind of do more of a head-dominant coordination, which can be okay and can be fine, but in a women's landscape dominated by people that can mix to like a G5, these notes aren't really going to stand out too much, they're not really going to be that great. So it's not a place their voice sits comfortably in or excels in. As I say, most people can do it if they mix, and that's all well and good. They can do some decent notes up there, but they probably couldn't sing extended phrases above like a C5 like most women could. It's just not where their voice really shines. And that's okay, they have other places they're really good, but the fifth octave isn't necessarily one of them. At least not like super comfortably or to stand out in any real way against mezzo sopranos and sopranos. Okay, so what subcategories of contraltos have we got? Handily, there's actually three main ones. So first you've got a coloratura contralto. These guys have really high, agile, flexible, lighter voices that almost resemble a mezzo-soprano in timbre. They're not quite the same. They have the lower extension of a mezzo-soprano, of an alto, and they still have an alto tone, alto range. But they can sustain higher notes than most altos can, than obviously the majority of contralto singers. Now, because they have so many characteristics out of the norm of a normal alto range or normal characterization of an alto style, these voice types are super, super rare. I don't know of any myself, but I think opera has quite a lot of them. Okay, second is a lyric contralto. These guys aren't quite as high or as comfortable in the higher ranges as coloratura, but they can still have more of a light, agile voice, and these are by far the most common altos that you'll hear. They're kind of not as smoky, they have more of a light, flexible tone, but they still have the lower extension of a contralto and lack the mega upper high range of a mezzo-soprano or soprano. And last is a dramatic contralto. These guys have the deepest, smokiest, richest, most powerful voices. They can have a good lower extension and their voice sounds huge. It sounds big, it sounds robust, it sounds powerful because of the size of their belt range and how much they can do with it. They lack the upper extension of a lot of contraltos, but they can do really powerful belting in the middle of their range because their voice is so thick, so dark, and so powerful. Okay, so where will you find an alto in the music industry? Due to, as we've said many times before, high notes really dominate in the pop landscape, you're not going to hear too many contraltos in the pop industry anymore. There were some in the 90s and some in the 80s, but there isn't really any anymore, or at least none that are mega famous, because there's just no real place for that particular voice type. It won't sell as well as other higher voice types. Places where you will find altos are in opera music and in choir music. These have by far the most parts and requirements for an alto voice, so this is where you'll find the majority of them. Okay, so let's look at some examples. First, I want to look at Imogen Heap. Now, you may not have heard of this lady, but she has a really interesting, deeper, almost androgynous tone that you really, really need to know about. Next is Annie Lennox. She is a Scottish singing sensation and legend. We all know about her. She was part of the mega super famous pop group Eurythmics, and she has a classic contralto range. Let's listen. This boat is sinking, this boat is sinking, this boat is sinking. Okay, and lastly, I want to look at Cher. Cher has a really famous, deep, androgynous voice, which she does sometimes mask with auto-tune, but when she actually sings properly, her real alto abilities come out. What so proudly we hailed at the twine. Okay, thank you very much for watching this episode. This is on like the rarest voice type. You won't have heard about them too often or hear too many of them on the radio, but they do exist. So if you are one, don't worry, there are places for you. Next time we'll look at the mezzo soprano. So for now, goodbye.